Thanks very much to our last speaker, Dr. Peter Hennings, for the comprehensive summary of an injection-induced seismicity in Texas. We have one final speaker in the technical presentation portion of this session before we launch into our panel. And I'm thrilled to introduce Analiese Andersen. Analiese is the MicroThermal Energy Account Executive at MicroSeismic Inc. And she'll be speaking today about monitoring induced seismicity in enhanced and conventional geothermal systems. Analiese, over to you.
Like Katie said, my name is Analiese Andersen, and I am the account executive for MicroThermal Energy, MicroSeismic Inc.'s geothermal division. Today, I will be presenting on monitoring induced seismicity in enhanced and conventional geothermal systems. Geothermal works. It's renewable baseload power. In conventional and enhanced geothermal systems, EGS, geothermally heated fluids are brought to the surface to spin a turbine and create electricity. This fluid is then injected back into the reservoir so it can once again be heated. This is what makes a geothermal system a renewable resource. We can reuse the fluid. However, fluid injection can alter the state of stress in the subsurface and has the potential to induce earthquakes. Additionally, the location of geothermal projects being in volcanic and fault zone regions are typically seismically active, which makes determining what is induced seismic activity as opposed to natural seismic activity a little tricky. While geothermal energy holds immense potential, it's crucial to address the challenges associated with induced seismicity. Without proper procedures in place to manage induced seismicity, public trust in geothermal energy could be lost. Not only could the social license to operate be lost, but physical damage could result in fatalities. We need to actively manage induced seismicity. Induced seismicity is non-naturally occurring seismic activity. Naturally occurring seismic activity can be large earthquakes from plate tectonics, and it can be tiny movements caused by the wind blowing through trees. Induced seismicity sources range from industrial power generation to fan quakes from sporting events or concerts. Seismicity occurs from a variety of sources on large and small scales. This is why it's important to collect baseline data to determine background noise before beginning a project. Baseline data shows where seismic sources are and relates them to local geology. Once baseline data has been established, site-specific safety procedures can be created with these factors in mind. When injecting fluids into the subsurface, induced events typically happen near the injection site and are small. However, sometimes events can become a little bigger than expected. This is why many projects implement a traffic light procedure of some kind to communicate when a fixed magnitude or peak ground velocity threshold has been passed. These triggers activate mitigation actions, which is usually reducing the rate of injection. Now, there is a widely known example of Basel, Switzerland, where a basic traffic light system was used to mitigate induced seismic hazards. Yet they still had to shut down operations despite following their procedure to a T. In 2007, there was a 5-kilometer deep EGS hot dry rock project beginning to inject fluid back into the reservoir that had been created by hydraulic fracturing. After a few days, their yellow light was triggered at a magnitude 2 event, so injection rate was reduced. After that, they experienced a larger event, a magnitude 2.6, triggering the orange light, so injection was stopped and the well was shut in. Despite all that, the red light was still triggered with a 2.7 and a 3.4 magnitude, even after injection had stopped. People can typically feel earthquakes around a magnitude 3, and public distrust ultimately caused the Basel EGS project to shut down in 2009. The influence from a large, thick fault zone caused larger seismic events than anticipated. However, this project was in an urban area, as you can see in this picture, and they were going to produce heat and electricity for nearby buildings. And with these projects in more populated areas, there is a higher risk for induced seismic events. Not all geothermal operations are in cities, and thresholds for magnitude vary based on jurisdiction. Challenges with managing induced seismicity are not unique to EGS projects. For example, the Geysers geothermal field in California, USA, is the largest geothermal field in the world and has experienced seismic events in and around their reservoir. This is not abnormal because the Geysers reservoir is situated on a 60 to 80 kilometer wide right lateral shear zone associated with the North American Pacific plate boundary. Natural seismic activity can be accelerated with the injection of fluids, so conventional geothermal systems also need to keep a close eye on their seismic data. Seismicity has been very low since the beginning of electricity production in 1960 at geysers, but it's increased in recent years, which could be due to thermoelastic stress changes or from larger volumes of fluid being injected, which increases microseismic activity throughout the reservoir. Operators pay close attention to their geophysics data to identify seismic sources and manage these seismic hazards, keeping their geothermal reservoirs at a steady state and evenly injecting fluids throughout the field. Simply using magnitude thresholds for a traffic light system is not effective at communicating when induced seismicity needs to be managed. Basic traffic light systems do not forecast future reservoir behavior. To effectively mitigate seismic hazards, traffic light systems need to use algorithmic approaches to predict seismic activity, not just react to it. Surveys still need to be done before to get baseline data for developing the traffic light system, but they also need to be adaptive to new information. Traffic light systems must account for the most current seismic data to provide statistical and predictive ways to manage induced seismicity. Traffic light systems can be more effective by accounting for earthquake size ratio, activation feedback, relaxation time, flow rate, and minimum pressure thresholds. These variables should also be considered when creating thresholds for managing induced seismicity. Induced seismic monitoring is a basic safety protocol that only uses a handful of geophones to detect the location and magnitude of seismic events by looking at events greater than 0 magnitude. But there are seismic magnitudes smaller than that, microseismic magnitudes. By monitoring only large events, small precursor events are being missed. Additional geophone stations increase the fold of what fractures can be detected, allowing for further characterization of a reservoir and creation of a discrete fracture network, a DFN. A DFN is a map of fractures within a specific reservoir. When a microseismic event occurs, the sound from the fracturing rock is received by the surface geophones. And based on the time that sound was received at one geophone in relation to others at known distances, the location of the fracture can be determined, as well as which way the fracture occurred. A DFN is created by using microseismic data and moment tensor theory to show geometric properties and focal mechanisms of fractures. What you see here that looks like a bunch of beach balls are focal mechanisms. They're interpretations of acoustic energy emitted by a fracture to show the orientation of said fracture that created the sound. Based on the geometry of these fractures, aperture can also be determined and used to create a final DFN. The single most valuable type of geophysics data for enhanced geothermal systems is microseismic data. When creating an EGS reservoir, the stimulation is an opportunity to collect detailed microseismic data that can be used to develop site-specific induced seismicity management plans. Just the presence of seismicity at a given location indicates a stress connection, but not necessarily a high permeability fluid connection. The example here shows events detected during hydraulic fracturing. On the left side, you see fractures that were intended to be created, and on the right, you see an abnormally long trend of events. We can see how big these events are, and we can also see how they're oriented, what their volumes are, and how do they change over time. By using a dense network of one-component geophones at the surface, we can detect down to a negative 2.5 magnitude for events at a targeted depth. The detailed information provided by microseismic monitoring helps to characterize a geothermal reservoir and keeps a project operating safely. In conclusion, induced seismicity from any fluid injection needs to be monitored closely. Baseline data and new data both need to be used in a traffic light system. To develop geothermal into the renewable baseload energy source we need, we must utilize predictive monitoring protocols to keep operations as safe as possible. We can develop induced seismicity monitoring traffic light protocols into a robust methodology for managing induced seismicity. This concludes my presentation. Thank you, Project Interspace, for this opportunity to speak, And again, my name is Analiese Andersen. You can find me and my colleagues at MicroSeismic Inc. on LinkedIn. Please reach out. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank all of our technical presenters today. Analiese, Peter, Arjun, thank you very much for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us in induced seismicity, from monitoring to geomechanics to mechanistic analysis. This background will be put to good use as we pivot to our panel discussion in just a few minutes. So please join us back here to hear how our panelists respond to these presentations and other topics. Thank you.